Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is Elena, and I run events here at the Strand. Before we launch into our Secrets of Publishing panel, I'd like to share a little bit of history about the Strand. The Strand was founded in 1927 by Benjamin Bass on 4th Avenue's Book Row. Stretching from Union Square to Astor Place, Book Row gradually dwindled to 48 bookstores, until after 96 years, the Strand is the sole survivor, now run by third-generation owner Nancy Bass Wyden. We want to thank all of you for your support. With our loyal community of book lovers and writers, such as our panelists, we wouldn't be here today. Tonight's panel will be moderated by Susan Shapiro, writing professor and best-selling author and co-author of many provocative books her family hates, including Unhooked, Lighting Up, 5 Men Who Broke My Heart, the Byline Bible, and the Book Bible. Please join me in welcoming Susan Shapiro.
Hi, everybody. Thank you guys for coming. I'm very excited to do the Secrets of Publishing panel tonight to launch American Shield. And I'm going to introduce the panelists. Aquilino Gonell grew up on his grandparents' farm in the Dominican Republic and moved to New York in 1992 at age 12. He enlisted in the Army at 20, became a decorated Iraq war veteran and proud U.S. citizen, the first in his family to graduate from college. On the Capitol Police Force, he rose to sergeant, wounded on the front lines on January 6, 2021. He was one of the first officers to testify before the House Committee investigating the insurrection. He's won the Congressional Gold Medal and Presidential Citizens Medal given to him by President Joe Biden. American Shield is his debut book, just out from Counterpoint Press. Want to wave?
Hi.
Great. Our editor, Dan Smetanka, is the vice president and editor-in-chief of Counterpoint Press. He's worked with Joan Silber, Dana Johnson, Natasha Dion, Ben Ehrenreich, Karen Bender, Todd Goldberg, Gino Frangella, Vanessa Hugh, Elizabeth Rossner, and Jamie Harrison. His authors have been winners and finalists for the National Book Award, the Penn Faulkner MBCC Award, and the LA Times Book Prize, the Edgar Award, NAACP Image Award, and Barnes & Noble Discover Award. Welcome, Dan. Counterpoint editor Dan Lopez is the author of the novel The Show Horse by Unnamed Press, the short story collection Part the Hauser, Limb the Sea, Chelsea Station editions, and has written for the Los Angeles Review of Books, Time Out New York, The Millions, Lambda Literary, and the anthology With New Gay Fiction. He's worked on books that explore the Hispanic Latino experience and edited both the English and the Spanish version of American Shield.
Yay.
Great. Meg Thompson grew up in Texas and moved to New York for NYU. She started in publishing in 2002, working with President Bill Clinton in his Harlem office as a researcher and fact checker on his memoirs, My Life. She worked at a few literary agencies before launching her own, Thompson Literary LLC. Her clients include New York Times bestselling authors Lisa Lee, Ken Denmead, Kelly Hampton, Tony Hart, Jeremy Rifkin, Tim Kreider, a Nobel Peace Prize laureate, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. She handles biography, memoir, music, popular science, politics, social justice, health, wellness, spirituality, fashion, art, design, and pop culture. And she's a member of the Association of American Literary Agents. Samantha Wekstein, next to her, has a BA from the University of Maryland. She began her career in 2013 at Writers House and joined Thompson Literary Agency, where she sold young adult, middle grade picture books, adult fiction, memoir, self-help, sci-fi, and fantasy. Her clients include Lainey Forbes, Corey Lear, Jesse Starr, Kenan Trabincevic, Orlando Mendiola, and me. She lives in Westchester with her husband and dog. Peter Catapano, New York Times editor, was born in Brooklyn and went to Cornell. He began his career at the Times in 1998, where he has launched several award-winning online series and worked with Oliver Sacks, E.O. Wilson, Errol Morris, and Suri Husted. He's edited 4 Norton anthologies, The Stone Reader, Modern Ethics, and 77 Arguments About Us and Question Everything, which I have right here. And he's written his own essays in the New York Times, LA Review of Books, Salon, and Killing the Buddha. He lives in Manhattan with his poet wife. And Jennifer Baker is a publishing professional of 20 years, creator, host of the Minorities in Publishing podcast, faculty member of the MFA program in creative nonfiction at Bay Path University, a writing consultant at Baruch College. And when she edited Electric Literature, she spoke to a lot of my classes and helped my students. She was also an editor at HarperCollins. She was named Publishers Weekly Superstar for her contributions to inclusion in publishing. She's editor of the BIPAC short story anthology, Everyday People, The Color of Life, and the author of Forgive Me Not, recently published by Penguin in 2023. #1 New York Times bestselling author Renee Watson calls her novel a riveting, heartbreaking, redemptive tale that is an astute and social commentary on the juvenile justice system and a powerful reflection on who deserves second chances. So thank you so much for being here. And thank you so much to the Strand Bookstore, Elena Esposito and Walker Ivers and Nancy Bass, and everybody buy books from the Strand. It's so amazing that they let us do these fantastic events in person and online. And okay, so let's get started. So Sergeant Gonell, what made you want to write, after being an Army veteran and a police officer for many years, what made you want to write American Shield?
Well, right after my testimony to the United States Congress, there was a lot of media interest and a lot of Fox News and far-right personalities began to tell a story that was not comparable to what any actual facts. So I decided to counteract that, and by telling my story the way I wanted to be told, truthful, and with my own narrative. And that's the reason why.
Fantastic. And Meg, how did you meet the sergeant?
We met through Olivia Troy. She worked for former Vice President Mike Pence on his coronavirus task force and counterterrorism. And she resigned, I believe, in August of 2020 and was a big whistleblower about the faults of the coronavirus task force. And she's a friend of the sergeant and all the other officers and introduced us.
And there'd already been several books on January 6th out, including Unthinkable by Congressman Raskin. So when you spoke with the sergeant, what did you think there was room for another one?
I did. I really didn't think of this as a January 6th book. I thought of it more as an immigrant story, and his story was so special, and there were so many wonderful characters like his mother and his girlfriends and his wife, and it was just a beautiful story of heroism. And January 6th, of course, plays a role, but it's not. I never thought of it as a January 6th memoir or a political book, really.
And Samantha, so you heard Meg talk about this project, and then
Meg was really excited to tell us that she had met the sergeant, and she was trying to figure out who the best writer would be for the book. And I, of course, thought of you immediately, Sue, because you had co-authored other projects before very successfully, and I loved your writing, and I thought you would be a very natural fit.
And have you guys done that before? Had co-authors or ghostwriters involved with different projects?
Sam and I hadn't directly. No, this was the first for us, and it's been really fun to co-agent together, actually.
Cool. Very cool. Okay, so Dan Smetanka. So again, there were other books that were similar out there. So what interested you with with American Shield?
Right. I think all of us immediately were kind of moved by the sergeant's story, the totality of the story, from his family coming to America and everything that he experienced in school, getting the GI Bill, leading all of it again up to January 6th. We didn't necessarily see it. I'll echo what Meg and Sam said. We didn't necessarily see it as a political book and only as a January 6th book, but one that kind of gave a larger insight into what it's like to come to this country and to try to succeed in this country.
Awesome. And Dan Lopez, so you wound up working on the English version and the Spanish version, and you actually told a great story. And I know Jose Garcia Escobar is here, and he was the translator for the Spanish version. So if you don't mind, tell us how complicated that got.
It's kind of a first for us here at Counterpoint. We've done translations into English before, but this was our first time doing a translation into Spanish. So it was a really fun new adventure for us, and something that I was very passionate about, because I wanted to make sure that the sergeant's story would be accessible by readers who didn't speak English or who felt more comfortable reading in Spanish. It just so happened too, and we did not plan this, that as we were looking for translators, I'd known Jose's work from other books, and so we contacted him, and he was happy to come on board. And it so happened that he was one of your students, Sue. which was not planned. So that was kind of a fun little thing that it turned out like almost it was meant to be. And because again, the sergeant speaks Spanish, that Jose and the sergeant were able to work together throughout the translation process, which is not something that always happens. A lot of times the translator cannot communicate with the original, author for whatever reason. Either they don't know each other, someone's passed, they live in different places, a lot of different things can happen. But in this case, it actually got to be a really cool collaboration between all three of us. And so I really thought that worked out really well because we got this much stronger.
So the sergeant is from the Dominican Republic, your family's from Cuba.
Yeah. There's we're all kind of he's from Guatemala, I believe.
Right.
And
so wasn't it 3 different kinds of Spanish?
It was. There's a variety of different terms that use, and that was one of the challenges and one of the advantages too of working in the book, that you got to kind of hear different perspectives. And again, different readers. Not everyone who reads the Spanish language edition is going to come from the same kind of the same country, so they won't necessarily have the same words. So it's kind of fun to see how the different regions will bring the same story to life.
Great. And Peter Catapano, I know that you've spoken to a lot of my classes and helped tons of my students break into the New York Times op-ed, but it's been harder lately. So when the Sarge sent you his piece, I always tell my students that a great way to launch a book is to 3 pages can change your life, and to sell a short piece. So when you got the piece, which was titled I Was Betrayed by President Trump, did it fit the elements that you would need to get in the New York Times op-ed pages?
Yeah, it definitely checked the boxes. And then when it checked the boxes, and I also was riveted by the narrative and also by the framing, framing it as a sort of statement of personal disappointment in the president was a powerful message that was being delivered right up front. But with January 6th, there were sort of cycles. So obviously everything has to do with the environment that we're working in at the moment, because we're daily, much different than, book editing and even, weekly or monthly magazine. So with January 6th, there would be kind of cycles where there would be a new hearing. It would come back into the news again. And this was one of those cycles. There had just been a hearing. And the other aspect of this that I think drew people in was the fact that Sergeant Gonell had just learned that he would not be able to continue to serve because of the injuries that he suffered on that day. And that gave it a sort of, I think everyone's sort of talking about what else is it besides a narrative of January 6th, and this aspect of someone who served the country in so many ways, losing his opportunity to continue to serve was a real emotional pull. And what happens in my job is that when I put things forward, people either respond or they don't. Usually when you don't hear, it doesn't mean the piece is bad. It just means it's not rising to the level. And with this piece, almost everyone responded really quickly, and we're able to move ahead pretty quickly on it.
And if you don't mind, for people that are interested in freelancing, so to write an op-ed for the New York Times and the Washington Post and a lot of these places, you pretty much have to write the whole piece. It's about 1,000 words. And it seems like the most important elements are something topical that's playing off the news, and you have to have a platform to write about it. And a lot of times you want something original or counterintuitive. Is that a good way to say it?
Yeah, those are all good. They're all good guideposts. I think that they factor into almost every decision we make, but there are a lot of variables. And you also sort of have to be lucky with timing and the people who read it and how quickly they read it. But that's a good guideline. I mean, the way we like to try to describe it to new writers is it can be a personal story. And in fact, it's good if it's a personal story, but it should have resonance that goes beyond your story as an author. So, in a case like this, the sergeant's story touched on issues of immigration, issues of national service, of disability, lots of things that were kind of circling around in the news anyway, combined with the fact that there was a hearing, I think it was just that week, that got people talking about it again.
Great. And Jennifer, I know that you've published a lot of powerful nonfiction, short essays and opinion pieces. And I remember you helped a lot of my students who were submitting work to Electric Literature. And so why, when it came to your own debut, Forgive Me Not, interestingly, you decided to go with fiction. So can you talk about that a little bit?
I'm primarily a fiction writer, and I landed more in a nonfiction space when I started working for Electric Literature and contributing and then editing and acquiring for them. So one of the things is that you kind of repeatedly or kind of consistently submit material. And I happen to have stuff that fit the area. But one of the biggest things I would talk to some of your students about, Sue, and even as I teach nonfiction and a low-res MFA, is that you really do need to know the publication that you're writing for, or you know the piece you're doing, and then finding the right place for it, just as we do in publishing, right? Like you write the piece, you figure out where the home is and where those companionships lie in terms of those who understand what you're doing. And with Forgive Me Not, that was a book I was working on for 8 years. And if you include the publishing process, really 9 years from start to finish that occurred. So op-eds can be a nice little quick and dirty, satisfactory moment of publication while you're, putting yourself in this like fiction space of finishing a novel and all that good stuff.
Great. And Sergeant, even though I like to tell my students, I give them the assignment, write about your most humiliating secret and lead the least secretive life you can. And we sort of celebrate a lot of successes. It's actually quite hard sometimes to write about what happened to you, especially I know in your case where you were writing about trauma. So could you talk about the difficulties of getting the story out? I know your wife was ambivalent about you speaking out.
Yeah, I mean, I had to first convince her to, because she had a lot of concerns about exposing some of the things and actually coming forward, because that's a big step. Not only was I risking my identity and coming forward, but I also was implicating them indirectly, because there was, as you know, the former president has a lot of influence and a lot of fanatics that no matter what you do, they still target you, no matter who you are and what you had done for this country. So my wife and family were concerned about me coming forward. And for a time, I did heed their concerns. I also was dealing with, not only was I dealing with my physical injury recovery, but I also was participating in a lot of criminal cases and investigations. So that also, I took that into account. It played a big role, but eventually I knew that coming forward or staying silent was not beneficial, not only for my health, but also for the people that needed to know what actually was happening. And at the time, it was very complicated and stressful and traumatic on itself, because not only was I doing those things to keep going the investigation, things like that, but I also was re-triggering my own trauma. I also had to take breaks, especially when, as you remember, when we had our conversations to get information and the data for the book. There was often time that I needed to tell you, hey, I need a break, because it was hard on me. Not only was I remembering things from Iraq, things from my childhood, but also things from January 6th, where one trauma after another was kind of like amplifying everything, and I needed to treat myself in a lot of ways for mental health as well. So that was a very challenging, and let alone, we had to meet the deadlines. Sorry.
And didn't you tell me that when you read the whole thing, you were kind of amazed to like read your like there was a joy in reading your whole life story?
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing that I never thought that I ever write a book. I mean, I did used to write a lot of poetry back then, but my book, that's the kind of book that I thought that I would end up writing, not about my life, not about my dirty secrets or the things that I had done, had it not been because of January 6th and all the obstacles and adversities that I had overcome. I don't think I would ever had coming forward and speak about that. It wasn't easy, but ultimately seeing the final product after speaking in several months working with you, it was very emotional because I actually saw a good part of my life or most of my life put in the book in a beautiful way that it grabbed most of the more eloquent moments or things that happened to me in a nice way that it could be presented in the final version, which is American Shield and Escudo Americano.
Cool. And I wanted to ask the publishing people, usually when it comes to memoir, like Dan, you've talked about at Counterpoint, which does a lot of literary books. Usually when it comes to memoir, you like to see the whole manuscript. So is it fair to say that with novels and fiction, you always need the full manuscript, and with nonfiction memoirs, sometimes they could be sold on proposal and sometimes the whole book?
I think that's true. I mean, especially with fiction titles, we're dealing with the full manuscript. Nonfiction, there's a little bit of wiggle room. If it's a piece of reporting or a piece of narrative nonfiction, oftentimes we'll see a proposal. The majority of the memoirs we take on, though, are full manuscripts. It was, I think, a special case for your and Sargent's book, where there was just a really good proposal and a really compelling story. I think the hardest thing when you're dealing with memoir is giving agents and publishers a sense of the full scope of the story. So even if you are working on a proposal, that I need to know what this book wants to do from A to Z. And that can sometimes be challenging to do in just a proposal.
And Dan Lopez, when you were working on your own books, did you write the whole manuscripts and then submit them?
Oh yeah, for sure. My books are fiction. As Dan mentioned, you rarely get anywhere with fiction on proposal. But yeah, so those, a lot of times the first book was a collection of stories, and that I mostly did to do events when I lived in New York. So I do readings and would write for those readings, and eventually I had enough stories to put together for a book. And the novel was something I'd just been working on for a while. It took me, a long time, like near a decade, to do that whole thing start to finish.
Did you go to an agent, or did you go directly to small publishers?
I have both of them. I don't have an agent. I have both of them with smaller presses, and in both cases it kind of was a result of just knowing the agent. The first book was a very micro press. I had written a story for an anthology that press did, and I had the collection ready, and so I was already going to self-publish it, and I convinced the guy to publish it for me. And with the novel, it's unnamed press. They're now a larger press, but at the time they were starting out here in LA, and I knew them from some connections I had when I worked at Goodreads. And so it kind of struck up a conversation with the editor there, she's left now, she's at another press. And that just kind of happened all organically. I don't recommend that. I recommend getting an agent for sure, because for instance, here at Counterpoint, we don't really do books that aren't agented. So it just does limit your career if you don't have an agent. But it so happened that both of mine didn't have them.
Great. And Meg, if somebody wanted to work with you as an agent, do you agree that if it's fiction, that they'd have to write the whole manuscript, and that if it's nonfiction, they could do a proposal? And how much of a book would somebody have to have finished before they would, start to contact you? For example, if somebody published a great short piece, is it too early to go to an agent and say, hey, there might be a book in this?
Yeah, I mean, I read, a lot of the pieces in the Times and the Washington Post looking for material. But if someone submits to me, especially a memoir or a narrative nonfiction, I like to see at least 3 really well fleshed out sample chapters and a full outline, chapter summaries. As Dan was saying earlier, I really want to see the arc of the whole memoir or the whole narrative to make sure there's a lot of there before I'll take it on. And then I'll kick it to Sam for fiction, because I only do nonfiction.
And I always, as I was saying to the Sarge, I always say, tell my students that 3 pages can change your life. And I think that that's a great way to start. And I remember with Banning, who's your client, Banning Lyon, he was working on a memoir and then he sold a short piece to the Washington Post. So from an agent standpoint, is that a good thing to do? If you're trying to sell a memoir, to sell a short piece first?
Absolutely. I actually had him do that on purpose because the memoir was fully written and it was beautiful, but he had no platform, that dirty word, like a big social media following or bylines or anything like that. So I very much encouraged him to take your class so that we could place the piece first before I went out to publishers with it. And it sold to Penguin Random House. So we're very happy with that.
Very exciting. Great. And Samantha, I know when you sold Orlando's, my student, Orlando Mendiola's children's book, The Last Tamale, that was a full manuscript. So is it also true with kids' books? Because I know that when we did World in Between, we sold that on a proposal, actually, even though they wound up publishing it as fiction.
Yeah, I mean, if you're writing fiction, you need a full manuscript for the most part. World in Between was a little bit different because we sold it as nonfiction and then it was later fictionalized. So we put together a nonfiction proposal. But yeah, the only time fiction ever sells on proposal is if the author is really, really established, like a mega best-selling author, or they have a proven track record, or they have a relationship with the publisher, and then the publisher is like, send me 50 pages of your next book and an outline. And that's the only way I've seen fiction sell without the full manuscript.
And if somebody wanted to contact you, how far along in the writing process should they be? Like, do you want people with fiction do they have to finish the whole book? And with nonfiction, do they need a completed proposal before they contact you?
For fiction, they have to be complete. I want a complete polished manuscript. Obviously, I'm an editorial agent, so I'm willing to get in there and work more on the manuscript with them and really make the vision come to life. But I want the authors to take it as far as they can on their own with their writing groups, just to make it as polished as possible and as close to what they had imagined the book to be from the outset. For nonfiction, I'm a little bit more flexible because it's not as challenging if you have like a good writing sample and a good platform to put together a nonfiction proposal. And so, if you did publish a piece that went viral and you wanted to reach out to me without like a concrete proposal, then I would definitely be more open to that than it would be for fiction. Great.
And Peter, like Jen and Dan Lopez, you edit, but you also write. So when it comes to your own writing, when you're doing those, you've done some terrific short pieces, do you pitch them or do you just write the whole essay yourself first?
Well, at the time where I had a little period where I was writing short sort of autobiographical vignettes off the news at the Times. And yeah, I'd still have to run it by, my colleagues, and eventually the boss would have to sign off. Sometimes I will, because I talk to editors and writers a lot. I will, have an informal discussion with them and tell them what I'm working on. And they might say, well, when you're finished, why don't you send it? That's the long piece I wrote for the Los Angeles Review of Books last year or the year before. It went that way. So I have an advantage in that, my friends and colleagues are also doing this for a living. So we can talk about things in the beginning stages, and I can gauge interest that way. I mean, it could be done from outside as well. But yeah, I mean, I have to pitch like everyone else. No one's going to publish a piece they don't want from me just because it's from me. I don't quite have that stature. So yeah, but I'm happy to do it, like being on this on the editorial, and I like to think of myself as a very considerate and rule following writer when I take the time to do that.
Great. And Jen, so you're on both sides, and I know that you were very helpful with some of my students that were pitching Electric Lit. And so I think they were sending in pitches, and then you would okay them or not. And was that common at Electric Lit? And also when you were at HarperCollins, were you handling nonfiction books that were by proposal?
Yeah, so for electric lit, some people had the essay done, which was really beneficial because you could really see the scope. And then there were mostly folks that pitched. I think for me, what I noticed was that the longer the pitch was, that meant they didn't know what they were going to write. So it would be kind of like an essay length pitch. Saying, I kind of want to look at these details, and I'm like, I don't think you know what you want to write. And so you're kind of throwing spaghetti at a wall in this situation and hoping that I dig through all of this to figure out what you're going to do. And so I would usually work with them on that, but at the same time, be very, very clear and set boundaries that it is not my job to write the piece for you or figure out your pitch. It is for you to really understand what you're pitching and the outlet itself, like I said earlier. At HarperCollins, I acquired everything. I was open to graphic, narratives, poetry, nonfiction, fiction, all kinds, short story collections, essay collections. And I pretty much acquired the gamut in 18 months. I acquired 19 books. Or was it 19 months and 18 books? Either way, one of those things. So I acquired literally one of everything, at least in terms of like genre, literary fiction, short stories, poetry collections, graphic, celebrity, da 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 da. And mostly for nonfiction, even for memoir, I was getting proposals. And I do think there was, I mean, I think it depends on the agent you're working with too, because in some instances with celebrities, you might get bare bones because they're writing on the fact that it's a celebrity. And then you might get something very fleshed out, because that the more fleshed out it is, the more money we can give you, because now we know what it looks like. And so that's the benefit of the conversations that go on at a publisher, is that your agent is strategizing with you, as Meg and Samantha have said. And then when it comes to us, the stronger material we have, the more we know about it, especially if it's a proposal, the more money I can feasibly get you. That doesn't guarantee I can get you more money in a house, depending on the house. But again, it is really, really helpful that I wouldn't have to explain to my publisher what I think this is going to be. I can literally give it to them, because publishers read the material and then approve the money.
Great. Okay, let's see. My student Leslie Hunter Gatson wants to ask Aquilino, how did being a man raised within the culture of the Dominican Republic affect how you've dealt with trauma? And she asked this as a woman who's half Jamaican and a native New Yorker who grew up in Washington Heights. So Aquilino, was it harder to deal with trauma and to open up emotionally based on having a Dominican upbringing?
I mean, part of I think a lot of the Latino community, I don't know, perhaps other culture as well, they do the same thing, is we don't tend to dwell on a lot of things in terms of trauma. We just, okay, shake it off and keep going. A lot of times, because of necessity, there's no time to heal, and people if they stumble, they just get up and continue and move on. I think in my case, because I already had been exposed to traumatic incidents in the past, and I was also treated for my PTSD, it was easier to recognize the symptoms this time around after January 6th, and therefore I took it up on myself without even waiting for my department at that time to approve, or the Department of Labor to approve my treatment. I knew I needed help, and I saw it as soon as possible. But a lot of times in the Spanish community, Latino community, especially in the Dominican Republic, we just stop being a CC and get going. You got things to do. So it's kind of like society itself pushes you to move on. And that's why also one of the things that when I read the book, I'm like, I can't believe I have gone through so much, and yet I'm still resilient, yet I'm still here. But staying silent after January 6th, I think it was being detrimental to my health. And I didn't want to become a statistic, kind of like the other officers that perhaps they stayed quiet and they took their own life and died by suicide. And I think, had I not taken up on myself to seek the treatment, to get a good supporting system around me, I think I would have been one of those statistics as well.
Didn't you say that speaking out was part of the healing process for you?
Yes, it was, and it still is. I mean, you see me talking about it right now, and it's a lot easier than right after it happened, the weeks and months after. Just last year, it was still hard for me to speak up, but after getting treatment, after speaking to the media, after speaking to the public and family members and people I don't know, it helped me sanitize some of the things that I had gone through. And there are still triggers. It all depends on what part of the day, my day, long day, am I talking, who I'm talking to, and what I'm talking about. So if it is being inside the tunnel or coming home, meeting my wife and talking to my wife, that still render a trigger. I learn how to deal with it, but so there are times that I cannot help it but be emotional and be traumatized again. Right before coming on this meeting right now, I just received more information about the prosecutor and investigators requesting for me to identify myself in videos, new videos that I had not seen. So right after this, I'm probably going to be doing that again. So that means I'm going to be re-triggered. I'm going to be reminded of that incident again. Talking about it makes it easier, but nevertheless, it's still traumatic.
And actually, so I have a lot of students that are here that are working on projects. So if you were to give advice, do you think that writing about a trauma can be helpful? And also you did get help psychologically to deal with the trauma. Did that make it easier? Did having a co-author make it easier in terms of writing about it?
The people need to understand that it's not coming forward and speak up. It's not for everybody. There's backlash. There are things, and I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of officers has opted to remain silent, because they see how the few of us who have come forward, we have been treated. I think there's a question on this panel right now that they're alluding to the fact that there's a conspiracy theorist personality stating in public, picking one, 3 minutes or a few seconds out of my 4 hours plus hours in the tunnel fighting the mob, and portraying it as if I'm not hurt, when in fact I'm walking past my pain. I'm full of adrenaline. I'm trying to save somebody's life. And if I not done that, try to help that person, then they'll be like, well, you neglected that person. You didn't do enough for that person. So yes, I'm fighting. Yes, you see me walking. I was hurt. I was bleeding on my hands. Luckily, that short video clip that they show is probably towards the end of my day, around 5:30 or 6. That's after everything else that happened. I had a little bit of time to dry the blood on my hands from my injuries. I was still limping around. Did I show it? No, because I was more concerned about saving that person's life in the video clip. And that same person who published that clip is alluding that I was trying to hide that body of the same person that I tried to help. So it's kind of like I cannot fight a lot of fires, because all these things are conspiracy theories. And a lot of those people who are saying those things were not even there at the Capitol. They will now understand how to be selfless and put their own life ahead of, somebody else's life ahead of their own. And that's exactly what I was doing on January 6th.
So so there's a downside when you come out there, especially in a political situation, speaking out and writing about it. There's a downside because there could be a backlash, is what you're saying, right?
Yeah, because if you look at it this way, just last week and a half ago, I think the former president said that the people who assaulted me and my colleagues, and those are political prisoners, those are hostages. Then if those are hostages and political prisoners, then what does that make me as a police officer who defended those elected officials of the Capitol? Does that make me the hostage taker? Does that make me the bad guy of the story. No, I was the police officer, and that on itself triggers a moral injury because I know I did the right thing. I know I defended. I know I kept my oath. I know I defended the Capitol and those elected officials, whether they were Republican, Democrat, or their ideology. And because of the way they portraying and taking up on themselves to belittle, degrade, they pretty much desecrate all sacrifices. And if there is another attack on the Capitol, and I were there at the Capitol, in all good conscience would I be able to do my job, because I don't know whether the people behind me, the elected officials, whether they're going to help me close the door or they're going to try to strangle me or remove me from the door, as I'm more worried trying to protect them from the threats. And that's an injury on its own.
Yeah, Jen, I know that, so you've also written about social justice issues and provocative pieces, and you've helped in your Minorities in Publishing podcast. You've talked about this. Is there sometimes a backlash? Do you think when writers come out and, challenge authority or, say provocative opinions that maybe aren't that popular, is that have you ever felt that way, that there's a vulnerability attached to being out there like that?
Oh yeah, for sure. And it goes back to what the sergeant has said, because if you're especially with the book, you're going to be going on a tour and talking about these things, and you can't really control what people ask you. You can try to be considerate, right? But you can't control what's asked. And most people are not really coming from a vindictive place. So there's an area of like the folks who really are interested in learning more are there. And sometimes those who are more cowardly tend to be online. That doesn't mean it's not as impactful, and it doesn't mean it's not violent. But hopefully those folks are not maybe in your face as much as if you were doing like a space like this, and so those precautions need to be made. Those precautions need to be aware of like moderation and spaces, of filtering your social media, going off social media, considering how you're wording things. And I think that's really where the editors and other people who are collaborating come in, because how you say things matters. It doesn't mean you should water down what's going on, but I think there needs to be these considerations, and that goes into a bigger conversation of representation and training and all that stuff. Of understanding, like if I just said, this is how it is, rather than in my experience, this is how it is. You see the difference? like you can argue against my experience, but I didn't say this is how it is. I'm saying in this experience. So if you don't agree with my experience, you don't agree with it, versus if I am having these blanket facts. And those are things, especially as an editor at Electric Lit and when I was at HarperCollins, I had to say these things, and we would have legal reviews. Like a lot of bigger publications will have. Electric Lit didn't have that capacity, but a New York Times does, right? A big press does have those capacities. So folks are also looking at the thing of like, well, could this get us in trouble and all that stuff? But that is not necessarily concentrating on your mental health as much as it is in like, we don't want to get sued. And so those various factors come into play. And I think that's really where it's coming to, how much do you want to reveal? Is this necessary to the story? Because those are things I would get people feeling like they needed to write traumatic pieces in their essays in particular in order to get visibility and clicks. And we've moved beyond that. I mean, it's not to say that there isn't clickbait, but I feel like in the space that we're in now in 2023, we have moved beyond the spectacle of it. And we do want something that resonates and has an ending, a beginning, middle, and end, and you come away with it. So I think that's a multifaceted answer of like, how do you protect yourself and who's around you to help you protect yourself, and really listening to what your mind and body is, but really telling the story and being honest about that and recognizing what may come with that in various climates.
Yeah, and Peter, I know some of my students that have written for the New York Times opinion page have gotten very strong opinions, and they're actually, you could sort of get, even though it's moderated, you get a lot of comments. Has that come up, the reaction to pieces, especially political pieces? And I think that there was a lawyer that took a look at the piece before it ran.
Yeah, we definitely have that process in place, from the writer's end and our end. and as editors, we do have a legal review, meaning we don't want to publish anything that's inflammatory or inaccurate, or that might cross that line that Jen was talking about of, civility in terms of what the conversation should be between authors and readers. On the other end, we have, our writers are often subject to trolls and abuse. They can, I work with Margaret Rankle on a regular basis, and she writes about politics in the South, and will sometimes get that kind of reaction. And, sometimes it rises to the level where we have to talk about it internally. Should this writer take any steps, removing information about them that might be online, those kind of things. But also, as I think Jen said too, is the online abuse tends to be more common than the in-person abuse. And, that's an increased level of, comfort, but it's still troubling, and there's psychological issues that come up with writers as well. So, we try to deal with that as a team. When we go in on a piece with a writer, we're in, all the way. So, I guess, we just handle it as a group when it's necessary, but it happens, sure. Especially at the Times, because people just have it out for the Times as well. So you almost invite more of it when you write for us.
Do they?
On the other hand, great things happen. So, for example, after the piece that Sergeant Gonell wrote, I was betrayed by President Trump. That was why we got so much interest in the book, and so we got a book. So it's exciting, but I see, there's a downside. It could be complicated. So let's get advice from the publishing executives, because I see there's a lot of questions there. So Dan, so Counterpoint takes fiction, nonfiction. I know you've done some great memoirs. So what advice do you give to people that are working on projects if they would love to try Counterpoint? So aside from completing the manuscript, making it as the best that it can possibly be, getting a literary agent, maybe publishing one piece the way we did to get attention, what other advice do you give to writers?
What more do they need, really? I would just get used to patience, because it just takes a long time. It takes a long time to find the right agent. A submission can take a long time too. And even if you do get to a house, the schedule is probably going to be so much longer than you could imagine. I mean, we are trying to buy books now for the first half of 2025. So, the process just takes a long time, and patience is a virtue. Also, get used to rejection, which is just another piece of information that you need in your journey. It takes a while to find your team. All you need is that one yes, but it could sometimes take a while to get there. So I think those are probably two of the things I would offer up the most.
And Dan Lopez, as a writer, do you have more empathy when you're getting manuscripts or you're rejecting manuscripts, because you know how difficult it is, especially with fiction?
Yeah, I mean, it's never fun to turn a project down. The reality is, obviously, the majority of things you see, you're not going to be able to move forward with. So that's why I always tell people when they ask me, like, what kind of project should I work on? What should I pitch to publishers? It should be something that you feel really passionate about, something that you're going to want to spend years working on it, because we've all written a bunch of stuff. We've all met a lot of writers, and there's nothing worse than you're working on a project and you lose steam on it, because that doesn't help anyone. So it's definitely one of those things that when I'm approaching a project that someone has pitched me, I'm evaluating that as well. It's not just, is it timely? Is the writing good? Does it telling you something larger about where we are in American culture? Like all those kind of things that are really important for what we decide to move forward with. But also, is this something that I'm going to want to sit with for a year, 2 years, 3 years, etc.? And sometimes the answer is no, and doesn't mean that it's not a good project. It just means maybe I'm not the best editor for it. So I think that's something we've all been kind of talking about on this panel, that your team and who you end up working together is really important, because if not everyone's kind of aligned on the vision, you're not going to get the full experience that you deserve and your work deserves, because again, you're going to spend a large chunk of your life working on whatever the project is. So you want to make sure everybody involved is feeling as passionate about it as you are, and will continue feeling passionate about it for the foreseeable future.
Great. And
And
Meg,
I-
tell us,
I
Meg,
think,
tell-
could I just emphasize that point? Because I think what Dan said is so important. The goal is not just to be published. The goal is to be published well, under conditions that you are comfortable with a team of people you like and trust, and who really see your work in the way that you wish for it to be seen. And I think that can sometimes be lost.
Great. So Meg, I know you've discovered a lot of people and had some exciting debuts. So what advice do you give to writers who are hoping to work with you? Should they check out the books that you've already published? Should they look at, is there a manuscript wish list where you explain very clearly what you're looking for?
Yeah, I'm looking for, adult nonfiction across the board. I have a real soft spot for humorists, definitely. And, that can take many forms. I think even in a, trauma memoir, there has to be moments of sort of levity and humor to give the reader a break, and sort of, crescendos and decrescendos. And so that's really important to me. And, just how does your book contribute to dialogue that may already be happening in society, and bring something sort of new to that dialogue? I'm always looking for that as well.
Cool. And Samantha, if you don't mind me mentioning this, one of my secret tricks at a certain point, when I had spent 7 years banging my head against the wall and I couldn't get, it is after 23 years of being a writer, I couldn't get published. Two authors actually told me that they hired professional ghost editors who are either like agents or book editors who on the side will like kick your book into shape. And I know sometimes you've done it on the side for kids' books. And I know Jen actually helped a couple of my students that were working on some great nonfiction projects. So is that something that you would recommend if someone's like not in an MFA program, or they haven't taken writing classes, but they're gung-ho on getting a book? Is that a good idea? Or like the Sergeant, is it sometimes worth it to consider a co-author if you're not a writer?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are certainly a lot of paths to getting published. There's no one right answer. I want to say that you don't have to spend money to become a published author. There are a lot of different ways you can get feedback, whether that's critique partners or writing groups. But, if you would like professional feedback, I do also think that it's a great venue to get honest, concrete advice for how to make your story the best it can be. And definitely getting an experienced co-writer, like in the case with you, Sue. You've done so many books, so many wonderful books you've co-written before. That can be really wonderful if you have a story you feel like needs to be told, but you don't necessarily know exactly the right way to tell it, or you're not as confident in your writing abilities. I think it can be great.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't know that if you have an amazing story, that you can, there's a lot of ways to get help, because you can have a ghost writer, you could have a ghost editor, or a teacher or mentor helping you, or a co-author. So I think that is a good thing for people that aren't writers to understand. Peter, any final advice that you give to people who are working on essays that they want to get in the New York Times? I know there's a lot of sections of Modern Love, and in style section, and in the well section, they've also taken pieces. But if somebody wants to get in the op-ed, it seems as if, so write 1,000 words, timely, idiosyncratic. You said you like personal work.
Yeah, well, you've kind of provided all the answer there for me, maybe because I've said it so many times. But yeah, I mean, I like, I respond very strongly to a writer's voice. So this is a little bit apart from what we're talking about. A lot of what we talk about when we discuss memoir is, like you said, do you have an amazing story? Were you in a place that was at the focus of national or global attention, and you have a perspective that no one else has? Those are, definitely motivating factors in choosing things, but there is the question of style, as Meg mentioned, the question of humor. Meg's client, Tim Kreider, is a writer I've worked with on probably 30 pieces at the Times, and he's just funny, and he happens to be a great writer as well, but he always makes me laugh, and that is really in severe shortage in our reading life these days, is like humor. So if any of you have a funny, streak in you, and you want to run with it, I advise that too. But, some sense of voice, some sense that I'm listening to a person speak directly to me is important too. It's like if you could pull off an accent, in an essay that would give you some extra character. That might be the kind of thing that appeals to editors.
Jen, any final advice? I know that you're a writer and as an editor, so advice that you would give writers?
I would echo a lot of what everyone on this panel said, and also, again, just really lean into what you're aiming for, because what Dan said about being published well is absolutely really important, and also being very proud of the work you do, and also just understanding there's not a lot you can control outside of making a really great book. So finding that companionship and that collaborative team that is going to really make it the best is really great. And don't underestimate what kind of connections you're making over time. So that can lead to your future agent, that can lead to just great critique partners. You don't know where people will be in 10 years. So anyone you have a really organic relationship with, it behooves you to just like stay in contact. And if you both are really serious about everything and you're getting good advice and you're able to be there for each other, community is imperative, and that'll show up for you a lot more than I think network and contacts and maybe having something go viral, which is super helpful. Not saying it's not. But so I kind of look into like the more kind of organic nature of the writing community, because that's really going to help you when the business side goes in ways that you cannot imagine. So focus on craft, focus on community, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, and it's brilliant already that you guys are coming to this panel, and you could follow everybody on social media. And I always quote Jen as saying, be a good literary citizen, which involves buying books. And if you like a book, post about it, and be supportive of other authors. So I think that's really smart. So we have time for one more question. So what's upcoming? What's next? So Sargent, I know that you're going to do another event in New York and another event in California. What else is are you do you want to do more events and more speaking engagements for the book right now?
I hope so. I mean, the Spanish version of the American show is coming up, and I hope that I get to do some events or at least TV and media platforms. In order for me,
congratulations
for us to
be on CNN. You were great on CNN. I just saw you.
Yeah, and today I did Telemundo for the Spanish community, but I think a lot of the Spanish community, especially in light of what happened last week with Univision and the former president kind of like downplaying what happened, I think needs to be people need to be reminded exactly how dangerous that period in our life, and especially that moment in January 6th was, at least for me, because those politicians, they got to go home safe to their family and continue to do their work because of people like me, because of what we did to keep them safe, and now they are downplaying what happened, including the former president, who had the ability.
Everyone should buy your book and have you speak, so you could
yes, pretty much.
Okay, good. And Jen, are you doing more events for Forgive Me Not that we can come to?
Yeah, it never ends.
Online, in person, or
4 months. So yeah, I'm doing a reading at Pete's Candy Store on December 21st, and then a virtual reading with New York Writers Coalition on December 13th. And everything else is private events. So
fantastic. And Dan, what's exciting coming up for Counterpoint, aside from American Shield coming out in Spanish now?
Yes, in 2 different languages. First time we've ever done that. And then looking forward into next year, if we can possibly think about next year already, since this is a kind of memoir focused crowd, we have a debut memoir coming in March called Rabbit Heart by Dr. Christine Irvin, which looks at the story of her mother who was killed when she was young, and the case was never solved. So she gives us the experience of what that was like for her family growing up under the shadow of that violence, and then what happened as an adult when the case was reopened and they finally went to kind of solve that crime. So it's beautiful, it's poetic, and I think it does what so many of the memoirs we're talking about tonight do. They kind of take us through that experience, a very singular, very heartrending experience, but allow the reader to kind of see what that was like, and also what life is like beyond that too. So it's a very moving book, and we're very proud of it.
Dan Lopez, what's coming up for you?
Oh, well, there's always so much. So they got a couple of novels coming up, one called Olive Days. It's about a fascinating story of a young woman in the Orthodox Jewish community here in LA. It's a novel where she is unhappy with her life, and she goes to a wife swapping event that her husband convinces go to that does not satisfy her, but it does kick off this new idea for her of finding joy and purpose in her own life that leads her into this really fascinating obsession with a Mexican American artist and getting back in touch with her own art. So stuff like that's coming up. I have a novel called Bogwife about a family in Appalachia that has this relationship with the land that might be mystical, might be magical. It's a little hard to tell at first. So as the book unwraps, you see this really interesting kind of noir Gothic element of what it means to kind of have a connection to the land you live in. And I don't want to give too much away because these things are coming down the line, but I don't want to spoil anything now. So we got a couple of things like that, and there's always, more stuff coming. So pay attention to our
and
social media.
They're all debut books.
Mhm.
So here at Counterpoint, we're very excited in kind of looking for those new writers and helping them realize their book and bring them to the marketplace.
Great. Meg, do you have any exciting debuts coming up?
Just in general, I'm sort of leaning more into music memoirs. I'm finding like if I hear a record or a song that I really love, I'll go purchase the record and read the liner notes and contact the artist and see if they want to write a book. So that's sort of like a new thing for me that I'm really enjoying. And I represent a singer named Allison Russell, who's been nominated for 8 Grammys now, and sold her book to Flatiron. It was preempted. She has not delivered yet, but I've read a lot of it and it's absolutely beautiful. So I'm sort of
when does Banning Lions, The Chair and the Valley coming out from Random House? When does that, next year?
That is coming out next June. Yes, we're getting it out before the election, so hopefully we can get some good press. And it's a really hopeful, beautiful story, as you know, of someone who survived trauma through the great outdoors, but becoming a backpacking guide. So that's Banning Lions, The Chair and the Valley.
Fantastic. And Samantha, so I know Orlando Mendiola's book, The Last Tamale, that's 2024 also?
Yeah, that's coming out next year. It's still in the pipeline. We're waiting for the final cover, working on flap copy. I'm really excited about that one. We talked about humor a little bit, but it's so funny. And I have another funny picture book also coming out in February called Peg Gets Cracking, about an egg that doesn't want to leave her shell. And so she's pegged the egg, and then she's pegged the egg with legs. And she discovers that the world is bigger and more beautiful than, her little shell. So yeah, I get to work on a lot of fun stuff.
And Peter, are you still doing events for your fantastic essay collection, Question Everything?
No book events right now, but I'm doing a couple of talks. I'm going to speak out in Kansas City at the AWP, but that's in February. But for now, I'm just kind of working on my own writing and working with 1 or 2 students as well.
Fantastic. And Sergeant Gonell, tell us what's the best thing about the book? Was it seeing it when it came out? Was it? I know you did an amazing event in LA where you met all these famous comedians, and you had a huge applause. You got a standing ovation the other night. What's been the most exciting part?
Just getting a lot of support. I know, like Peter was saying earlier, a lot of noises are coming out from the internet and people like that, louder voices and things like that, but actually seeing the level of support from people who know what happened, who witnessed what happened, and they appreciate what I did on January 6th. And I'm happy that that also allowed me to use that as a stepping stone to possibly write a children's book with you down the road, because we have a lot of information about my childhood, 12 years and old, but I think we have another story for children's 12 and below, to leading to my coming to America as well. I'm also trying to use my trauma for PTSD in another way that not only was going to help me, but my community as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. I want to thank the Strand Bookstore, Elena Esposito, and especially our fantastic panelists. So it was Dan Smetanka, the editor-in-chief of Counterpoint Press, our editor, Dan Lopez, who did the book both in English and in Spanish at the same time, Meg Thompson, who's the founder of Thompson Literary Agency, my literary agent, Samantha Wekstein, who's been amazing, New York Times editor, Peter Catapano, who's the editor of Question Everything, and Jennifer Baker, whose new novel, Forgive Me Not, recently came out. And buy books at the Strand. The Strand Bookstore is an amazing independent bookstore. Everybody buy books here. You can buy them online. They also have great tchotchkes. It's just a fantastic, amazing bookstore. And don't ever buy books from Amazon or any place where you can't do a book event, or there will be no more book events. So you have to support independent bookstores like this. And thank you guys so much for doing it.
And thank you all guys for helping me bring my story to the forefront.
Bye.
Couldn't have done it without you guys. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you.
Congrats. I just want to echo my thanks for everybody tonight. There are links to all of the books from tonight's event in the chat. Please go buy them. Have a great night, everybody.
Happy holiday. Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
See you later.